and he's just taken to heart what I've been saying. There he is. Hey, Rube.
He's getting it.
Yeah, hey,
Sabbath
that's
nut.
good. That's good. Eutychus. I'll call you Eutychus.
Welcome back to another week of Carpool Q&A. Here we are. Today we're doing ministry burnout. How you going, Tom?
I'm good, mate. How are you, Ruben?
Yeah, I'm going good.
How you going, Sam?
I'm great.
Sweet.
Ruben's dragging along in the back as well. He's playing keys down at Gold Coast. So, talk to me about Pastor Tom. Ministry burnout.
Yep.
What is ministry burnout, and
How far away am I?
yeah, how long? Yeah.
You'll have to ask Wikipedia for a definition, but ministry burnout is, well, you correct me if I'm wrong, if this is what you're referring to, but is when guys in ministry get overstressed, overworked, and overcommitted, and just can't do it anymore, and so they don't have the mental, spiritual, emotional, physical capacity to continue, and so they quit.
Yeah. Quit the ministry.
Yeah, quit the ministry, pull out, maybe only for a couple of years, maybe for a period, often for good. Go and sell
Sabbatical.
insurance or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what people usually mean by that.
So what are some general or usual causes of ministry burnout, and are they legit causes?
Yeah, that's probably the most important question is this a legitimate, I just gave the definition that I know people work on, but
Yeah.
is that a legitimate category? Is that a legitimate way of thinking about quitting the ministry? And I don't think it is. No, it's not. There's no such thing as genuine burnout. There's such thing as quitting. There's such thing as ultimately it's going to come down to a poor Sabbath work relationship or balance. Sabbath work balance. That's what it
Right.
comes down to. There's no such thing as working too hard. There's no such thing as being too stressed or being having too much on the plate. Rather, it's the thing that exists is that work and what is on your plate and what stress you have eats into and then destroys your Sabbath, so that you don't have a Sabbath, right? Any amount of work will destroy you if you don't have a Sabbath, right? Doesn't matter how much you do it. If you don't have a Sabbath, you'll be wiped out. That's not how God has designed us. He's built our bodies from the creation onwards, given us the creation ordinance of Sabbath, so that we would work 6, rest 1. Work 6, rest 1. That's the principle. And when we abuse that or neglect that principle, what we have is what we might call burnout, but is really breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the Sabbath,
Yeah.
what does the New Testament actually teach about the Sabbath? There's a lot of confusion around. Is it for today? Is it abolished? Does it have to be on a certain day?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'll avoid the whole question, the whole big debate, and all the ins and the outs of how deeply does and authoritatively does the Sabbath apply to the Christian, the New Covenant Christian today. I'll basically just repeat or summarize what our confession, the London Baptist, basically says about the Sabbath, which is that there is a Sabbath for the people of God, Hebrews 4. It is currently and presently a day set aside for rest and worship, so that we can give ourselves to the Lord, recall and remember His gospel, and receive the means of grace. For the Christian, it is no longer the seventh day, which was the Jewish Sabbath. It is now the first day of the week, which was set aside for worship and rest. We see in the New Testament. There is a little bit of wiggle room about is taking a Sabbath on a day that isn't a Sunday necessarily sin? Is some cultures like Nepal who Saturday's the rest day, Sunday's a full work day? Well, is Christians doing worship and rest on the Saturday? Is that necessarily sinful? No, it's not quite that tight, I believe. However, where possible, Sunday is the first day of the week set apart to Jesus as Lord. He changed the Sabbath to the first day of the week because He's Lord of the Sabbath and gets to do that. And so the New Testament Sabbath is a celebration of the new creation and the redemption, rather than simply looking back to the remembrance of God's rest after the Sabbath. So creation of the world to Jesus, the Sabbath was the seventh day. Jesus Christ onwards, the Sabbath is on a Sunday. But even really more important than that, in at least principle, is the fact that the Sabbath was not merely this ordinance command given to Israel as a part of their ceremony. Right? It's not a part of merely the ceremonial laws. There is a lot of their ceremonial laws that applied to the Sabbath, and a lot of the particulars about the Sabbath that were ceremonial, the sacrifices to do, what you could do on the Sabbath, the fact that it had to be the seventh day. That stuff was ceremonial and therefore passed away with Jesus. But the essence of the Sabbath command is in fact not just Israelite, is not just Christian, it's in fact what we call, as I said before, a creation ordinance. It was a principle that God put into the world, like marriage, like gender, like all of the other moral commandments in mankind's heart, in the conscience, like even social government, societal government. All of those things are in fact creation ordinances. They were in place from the very beginning. They're a part of the creation design itself, and therefore we neglect them to our own peril. Society will not be able to flourish without some system of government. Humanity will not be able to flourish without marriage. And on the personal level, we and society, but we cannot flourish without submitting to God's creational design of Sabbath, which means that one day in 7, you take a break, you rest and you worship, and the only exceptions you make for that should really be what the New Testament shows us, and the Old Testament sort of shows us as well, is for acts of necessity and works of mercy. Being good for other people and doing what you've got to do to survive, right? But we don't do our normal, usual day of work. So for pastors, what this comes down to is, well, no pastor can really functionally take their Sabbath on a Sunday, because that's the day that they're working, ministering to souls, preaching the gospel, doing all sorts of things. That's the day they're heading up the meeting of the people of God. So Sunday doesn't really count as a Sabbath if you're working on it, and that's your ordinary work. So you're going to find another day to Sabbath on. And we see that principle in the Old Covenant where, well, what day did the Levites take as a Sabbath? Because on the Sabbath, they were working hard in the temple, butchering animals for sacrifice. So they Sabbathed on different days. There is that flexibility. But, yeah, pastors who do not take good, genuine, separated, consecrated Sabbaths, where they rest from their work, they don't sit down, they only field emergency calls, and they only meet up with people in emergencies, and they don't use it as a day to catch up on sermon writing. Sabbath is a Sabbath. You rest it, you spend it with family, and you recall the goodness of God. I think it's the breakdown of that which brings about what is so-called burnout. If men have that, in other words, I don't think there's a limit on the amount that there's no objective standard of being overworked, right? And if there is, no one in our generation has gotten close. Like, if you can read the life of Spurgeon, George Whitfield, Adoniram Judson, and then come away thinking, yeah, I think I work harder than that, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Now, if they were able to work at that pace and that level, then there is no objective standard of. It's not, the question is not, are you working too hard or too much or doing too much? The question is, are you working at a level that you can still responsibly Sabbath? If that's the case, then you won't burn out.
Yep. There you go.
Now, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about there's other balances in a man's life. Obviously, he also has to consider his family and his wife and other responsibilities. I'm not saying, right, but that they don't count. I'm just saying, as far as the workload goes, if your wife's okay with you, she's supporting you, which is what we spoke about in that episode, and if you have the capacity to do it, and that's the big thing we'll talk about a bit, is your own capacity, then There's no such thing as working too hard, as long as you're Sabbathing correctly.
Cool. So if it really just comes down to having a Sabbath and having a good, healthy work-Sabbath relationship, why do you think ministry burnout is so common?
Because pastors don't Sabbath.
Right.
I think a lot of them, that's pretty broad stroke, but I think anybody who complains of burnout like that, probably they're trying to take a Sunday as a Sabbath so that they can work the other days. Or just because you're not working hard doesn't mean it's a Sabbath, right? This is one element that people don't get, and that guys who work hard in ministry have to get down pat, is that it's actually really hard work to be able to get a day of rest. Because that means that now our modern day system is 5 days on, 2 days off, right? A 2-day weekend. The Jewish system, God's system, is 6 days of work, 1 day of weekend, right? That doesn't mean that you're in sin if your boss doesn't employ you 6 days. Find other ways to stay busy on the Saturday. But lazy people can't Sabbath because they have nothing to rest from. The commandment is twofold. He says, 6 days you shall work, 1 day you shall rest. If you've just got laziness throughout all the days, then Sunday is not a Sabbath, it's just being as lazy as any other day, but it's not resting, because you're not resting from anything. You should get to Saturday night, pooped, wiped out, running on fumes, so that as you come back into the time of rest, you come back into the means of grace, or if you're a pastor and you're Sabbath on a different day, as you recharge, it's actually a day of resting, because you've got other jobs you need to do, you've got things you need to catch up on, you've worked yourself ragged this week, but today I recharge, today I rest in the Lord. He made this day for me. It's not a curse, it's a blessing. And He will raise me up like wings on eagles, and He will get me through. I will run and not grow weary. I will serve like this, and I won't grow faint. That's the promise of God. So, yeah.
So what would be the heat to maybe a pastor or someone in ministry, or just someone in, I guess, in life in general, that they're on the brink of burning out. They're feeling like, man, if this keeps going like this, I'm gonna quit soon. I'm just gonna hang up.
Yeah.
Like, what's the counsel to that person, to that pastor, to that minister?
You need to find the least kingdom-oriented thing in your schedule and throw it out. Don't do it anymore. Free yourself up from it. Maybe you help at a soup kitchen. Maybe you volunteer on something that somebody else could easily do. You need to pull back. You need to find a way to delegate things. Just don't ever use the excuse when you're pulling back on something, I'm working too hard. You're not working too hard. Until you outwork Whitfield and Jesus, you're not working too hard. Don't say you're working too hard. That's the lie of burnout.
Right.
Say, I'm not managing my relationship with work and Sabbath enough. I need to delegate this. I need to pull back from this. It's not working out right. So throw away things out of your calendar that are not kingdom oriented, that will have not enormous fallout. For pastors, that can be really hard because everything feels really important. Well, delegate. Find other people to do stuff, or just punch a ministry off of the schedule and say, we're not doing that anymore because it's getting in my way of resting and preaching the word and praying, and therefore the core ministry that I'm called to do, so we just can't do it. Find things that are unurgent, that are filling up your week. Get rid of them. That's probably a lot of stuff you're calling recreation and rest. This is what our culture does. We fill our time with recreational rest, like Netflix and video games, but that's not Sabbath.
Yeah.
So we've replaced Sabbath with Sunday sesh and beers with the guys and Netflix, instead of putting it aside to consider the Lord and rest properly, right? So you will probably actually be able to find in your week hours and hours you're spending on social media, hours and hours you're spending on TV, hours and hours you're spending doing things you don't need to do. Maybe if you're in fellowship groups and other ministries, maybe you don't need to get rid of them. You just need to leave earlier. Leave at 9 instead of 11, right? Don't hang out as long. get home, do your prayer, get to bed, sleep more. That's definitely one of the things we spoke about that in a previous week. Is you need to be sleeping. So you just need to remove things off of your calendar so that you can rest in the Lord properly, and to simply come back to the one main bell that we keep on ringing every week here is you need to be in a biblical, strong, sound, local church that preaches the word, and that hearing of the gospel every week is something that will be good. That will be good for your soul and necessary for you to be able to rest properly.
So if people are looking out at the people in their church and how hard these other people work, like Whitfield and Spurgeon, how should someone gauge what their capacity is and what's hardworking for that person? Is it the same hardworking for this person? How do we judge people's capacity?
So you need to just, obviously this is a very personal thing, that you need to take responsibility over your own understanding of yourself. You need to know yourself well. And a part of being self-disciplined and self-controlled is knowing yourself, right? Is knowing how you work, what triggers you, what gets you going, what is encouraging for you, what you love to do, what your gifts are. And one of these things is your own capacity. So not everybody has the same capacity. Don't hear me saying anybody could do what I do, or anybody out there could be able to do the level that you're doing, and if they struggle, they're just not Sabbathing enough. That's not what I'm saying. Each of us have different God-given capacities to do different amounts of things, right? So what I'm saying is, I can't remember where I first heard this analogy, but for the Lord Jesus Christ, while you're living in this life, for Jesus, everybody's plate should be full, right? Filled with the right amount of stuff. Family, work, Sabbath, service in the kingdom, right? Everybody's plate should be full. We shouldn't try and get through this life cruising. We should have a full plate. That's the language people often use. Oh, my plate's pretty full at the moment, or got to, everybody should have a full plate, but people have different size plates. Right? So some people are full and they're running 5 ministries, doing 2 degrees, having a family, and planting a church. Other people have a full plate and they're running a Bible study and working full time. Okay? Now, the next thing I'm going to say, though, is that capacity that you've got is not a static thing. Your capacity is a muscle. And the more you use it, so you need to firstly responsibly put onto your plate and into your life only so much as you can do while responsibly Sabbathing and effectively do those tasks given you. But then you should also have in the back of your mind and the front of your planning, how do I increase my capacity? Well, capacity is a muscle. The more you use it, the more developed and strong it becomes, right? It grows. So you go, all right, I'm at capacity here. I'm pretty full. So this is sort of it's very counterintuitive. What's the answer to burnout? Usually it's do more. Just do more better. Sabbath better. Be more intentional with your family. Be more intentional with your sleep. Be more intentional with your work. Don't scroll. Be focused. But add something to the plate. Remove irrelevant stuff that doesn't matter. Put in something that will stretch your capacity.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the skill and that's the art and the craft of flexing and growing your capacity. Is if you might, and this is why biographies or as Hebrews 13 says, knowing your leaders is so helpful, because you know them and you read biographies from saints of the past and you go, oh my goodness, I thought I was going to burn out because I'm doing like 2 things in my week. Judson was working 100 hours a week, translating the Bible in his spare time, actively dying. What am I complaining about? I'm soft. I need to increase my capacity. So we should all responsibly have a full plate, plus start stretching our capacity and go, well, I need to do more so that I can do more. Because this is the reality of the muscle, is if you don't use it, you atrophy. Right, when I broke my leg and I wasn't allowed to walk on my leg for 8 weeks, the muscle didn't stay as it was, it atrophied. It went away. and now I'm experiencing in the trying to rebuild it up. If I push it and I stress it through exercise and weights in the gym, and then I keep it at the same level for a while, right? The workout that I'm doing, I'll eventually end up going, oh, this is hard work, and it stops growing because my stretching it stopped. So that's how muscles work. If you don't use it, you lose it. But then if you try and keep your capacity static as it is, then you'll actually find you'll end up burning out again. Because you'll go, oh man, I've been at 100% for a while here. I'm really stressed out. So you get rid of one thing. Okay, now I'm at 80% capacity. That's better. And then guess what? That capacity just became your new 100% because you atrophied. So now you're sitting with a smaller plate, smaller muscle. I'm mixing the metaphors here. A smaller capacity, and then you go, oh gee, I'm at 100% again. I should get rid of some of my stuff. So you go down to what would have been your original 60%. And then after another 2 months, you go, oh man, I don't know how I'm keeping up with all of this. I should probably focus on some me time here and Sabbath a bit better. I won't do any of this stuff. And by then, that's why you get ministers who are working for 2 days a week, doing one sermon every couple of weeks, maybe a meeting here and there in a Bible study, and a couple of cafe catch-ups here and there with other pastors, and they say they're burning out. They're not. They're hardly doing 2 days worth of work. So rather, if you're afraid of burnout, do more. But do more better. And as you do so, you'll find your capacity grows.
Some counsel people might give is, take a month off.
Yeah.
Or you need a sabbatical. You need to go take your family, go have a long holiday. Is that ever helpful advice when someone's just on the brink of burnout?
No.
Go have some time off.
No, so the sabbaticals are cool. Sabbaticals are fine, extended leave to go away and sort of take a break when needed. But only people who are working hard and increasing their capacity and balancing their work-Sabbath relationship, only those people are the kind of people who you should say, hey, you're doing things responsibly and well. You're not going to burn out if you don't have it.
Yeah.
Because if you now have this extended leave, you're going to come back worse. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to come back sick, physically sick. This is what usually happens. You'll be physically sick because your sickness will catch up to you once you take a break. You'll realize that, resting was nice. You'll like the feeling of that. Now you're allergic to work. So if you're allergic to work, you don't give them a holiday. You either fire them or teach them how to work Sabbath properly. Right? So I'm not against sabbaticals. They can be abused. And I'm not saying that a pastor out there who's on the brink of burnout needs to just keep on going and blitzing it. I mean, maybe they need to restructure their entire life. But just be careful. That 4 weeks or 7 weeks of leave in the Bahamas is not going to fix that.
How should someone responsibly increase their capacity? What does that look like to increase one's capacity?
Yeah. Say we got somebody out there who's thinking about ministry, or who is just wanting to serve lots in their local church, or maybe it's even more on their business side of things. They're wanting to be more of a productive, less lazy person. When I'm saying you need to increase your capacity, you need to find other ways of stretching your capacity. So finding things that take time to do, things that require your energy, things that have measurable outcomes, right? And add them to your schedule. But if you're early on in doing this and your ability to stretch your capacity is untested and unproven, you need to be careful about what you add. So the perfect example of this is, of course, like we were saying before, the gym. If you realize I'm actually quite weak, right? My capacity muscle is very small. I want to go into the gym and I want to grow my capacity muscle. What do? Well, you don't rack up 250 kilos straight onto the bench and try and give that a go. You'll kill yourself. It'll come down on top of your trachea and crush you. It'll be hilarious, but it'll be deadly. And you definitely don't walk into the gym and go, I'm going to be leading a personal training class this week, just to sort of see whether or not I'm any good at this fitness, right? You don't do that. In the same vein, if you're wanting to stretch your capacity, you don't go and start a a full-time theological degree. Right? That'll cost you 50 grand whether you pass or fail. You don't go and try and plant a church if your capacity is untested. You don't go and just take on a new Bible study. You don't go and just start a second business or have an extra kid because you want to stretch your capacity. Don't juggle. Don't train or practice with other people's eternities. Okay. But find other ways that you can just add tasks, add worthwhile tasks to your week that align with the mission that God has given you as an individual that can increase your capacity and your requirement for discipline. So maybe it means that you take on, to start off with, you take on a 6-month diploma that really only takes about 8 to 12 hours a week. And you think, I don't have 8 to 12 hours. Okay, well, commit to it. It's $2,000. If you fail it, it's only $2,000. But having that deadline will force you to do it. Maybe it's even easier than that. You just go online and find a couple of lectures on theology from some seminaries, and you go, I'm going to treat it like a class. I'm going to give myself 2 months to finish this, and I'm going to do summaries of every lecture that they've got. There you go, a self-assigned capacity stretching task. Or you go and join a gym. This is one that I absolutely recommend to people, especially dudes, is go and do something that will increase your testosterone, like pump an iron at the gym, because the higher testosterone you have, the higher goal-reaching capacity you will have. It'll affect every part of you. But also, just in your schedule, by going to the gym, you've added something that you need to be up early for. You need to be there. You need to do the self-discipline and self-mastery of just committing to the grind of gym, and you have measurable outcomes, whether it's weight loss, increasing in your rep maximum, increasing in your maximum weight lifts, all that sort of stuff. It's measurable. If you pull out or if you fail, no one else really suffers. That was just a you thing, So find a safe way that you can do something that requires your energy and has a measurable outcome. That'll be mine. And then as that goes well, go, all right, I'll do something else. Okay, I'll commit to something else. And you know what? I'll take on extra work at church. I'll take on an extra shift at work. And you just keep on testing and assessing your work-Sabbath ratio.
Yep.
And if it's still 1 to 7, keep on going. That's growing your capacity.
Yep. Cool. As sort of a bit of a different angle question. As ministers are racking up their years in the ministry and decades in the ministry, should ministers expect a time towards the end of their ministry where there's sort of this semi-retirement, like kind of slow down, I'm getting old now? What does it look like for a minister at the end of their life? Is there a burnout for old ministers?
Is there a burnout for age?
Yeah.
No.
So, as a young guy, no.
Look, as someone who's been there before, let me tell you, these guys have no excuse. Now, of course, age will slow you down to a degree. Your mental faculties, how much of your day is productive. A lot of that stuff is true, yes. However, it's been my experience, not my experience, it's been my experience from the pastors and other guys that I talk to, that they will say, I was pretty productive in my 20s, I was more productive in my 30s. I was pretty productive in my 30s with young kids, etc. I was double productive in my 40s. I was pretty dang productive in my 40s. I tripled in my 50s. When I became a grandpa in my 50s and 60s, and life just looks so different when you're that much older. Quadrupled my capacity from the previous decade, right? If you're seeking to stretch your capacity will keep on stretching and growing. However, that doesn't mean that you're always doing the same work and the same kind of work, right? So, for example, you take someone like John MacArthur, who's been preaching for 50 years, week by week, 2 sermons every week, plus some, doing expository sermons. He does not take the same amount of time these days as he used to prepare a sermon, right? As Spurgeon would teach us in his lectures to my students, somebody who's preaching just a few years should be able to open almost any text of Scripture and within about 10 minutes have a sermon ready to go. It won't be their best sermon, but it'll have a sermon ready to go, right? So as you get older, things get easier. In one degree, they may get harder physically, but in another degree, you've got so much delegating skills. You've got more people who trust you, who you can give jobs to. You've got a smarter mind. You've got wisdom. You've got the Spirit who's been giving you constantly growing discernment. So I'm not saying you'll be doing all the same things, running around, planting churches, driving all the place, house to house, and doing all that. But you can. It's been my experience that the older pastors say, I can get way more done in my 70s than I was getting done in my 50s. It's crazy. So is there space for retirement for ministers? Yeah, sometimes you need to hand over because you realise that this young guy needs to take over it so that he can develop his capacity, so that he can lead the next generation. But I like what Piper says about retirement. There really is no excuse for a Christian to dream of rest for 20 years at the end of their working life where they do nothing. If you're called to be a minister, God has called you to have a burning heart for souls and the growing of the church. Yes, you might stop working as a senior pastor at a particular church, but if you have a heart for the Lord, they'll still find a way. And this has been my experience with guys that I've spoken to. You'll still find a way that you can serve the Lord in your capacity. Maybe it's teaching. Maybe it's authorship. Maybe it's doing something different. But age should not be an excuse, as it has been made these days, for people to cruise at a slow float into the presence of God for Judgment Day for the last 20 years of their life in a slow-going retirement.
Yeah. Very good. What's just sort of some general encouragements to ministers, pastors, upcoming ministers who are realising that ministry is hard work, grind, working hard? What's just general encouragements for the labourers of the field?
There's no better work to be doing. It is. If you've got your eyes open to the job, there is no more horrendous job that comes with more horrible implications of failure. When we consider the eternality of souls and where people go if we fail in our ministry there's no more painful work that is so face to face with eternity, and yet there is nothing more glorious. There's nothing you'd rather be doing. Paul listed frequently. He worked harder than any of us. He suffered more than any of us. He was anxious more than any of us. He was accused and abused and blamed and slandered more than any of us. He spent much of his public ministry life in chains, and so it goes with Jesus. But yet, with all of the freedom that they had, what did they choose to do? They lived and died for the gospel, and so is Paul's example to us, that no matter how painful it gets, it is where God has invested His glory, His power, and His love. It's His bride. There's nothing you'd rather be doing. And everything will, by God, be sorted out that needs to be sorted out. Psalm 110 verse 3. The saints will be made willing in the day of Christ's power. Jesus is ruling. He cares more about the church than you do. He has better plans for the church than you do. So wherever our anxieties are coming up because God's not meeting our plans or our goals, submit to His will. He has a glorious will for your church and your ministry if we submit to Him. Anxieties, stresses, those seasons come and they go, and they are not permanent. They're not permanent. The glory of the job is permanent, and the souls that are being saved and the souls that are being edified and grown in the kingdom, they are eternal. That's what you're living for. The glory of God is worth all of our suffering, all of our difficulties, and all of our near burning out. I think it was Whitfield. No, it was Baxter in The Reformed Pastor, which every one of these guys, if you're a pastor or somebody training for ministry and you thinking around this of like how hard do we work, you need to go and read The Reformed Pastor by Richard Baxter. It's an amazing book and it touches exactly on this. And he has this line, and I'll leave it with this. He says, "What is a candle for except to be burned? We're candles for the Lord Jesus Christ. Let us be burned out for him." That's the job.
Praise the Lord. Labour on. Thanks everyone for tuning in to this week's Carpool Q&A. More ministry, ecclesiology, church planting, ministry stuff next week.
Sweet.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rubes.
Thanks,
See
Ruben.
ya.